Hey everyone, it is Bond here for the Ghost Furnace. Hope everyone's doing wonderful out there today. We have what I think is a super fun story for you guys this evening. This one is going to be kind of a lot of me talking, and then we'll kind of get into what we think about it. So this story is one that I first ran into in Stan Gordon's seminal work, Silent Invasion, which I know we have talked about at multiple times. If you've never read it, pick it up. You can get it on Amazon for like a few bucks used. It's not expensive, but it's a great series of accounts, mainly covering the flap in the early 70s in the Chestnut Ridge area of Pennsylvania, which is just to the east of us.
And I'm just going to say, just so people know that I am here and I am awake, that every time Brendan says, you know, this person, Stan Gordon, is the one that's always drawing that, hey, I'm not saying Bigfoot and aliens are the same thing, but there seems to be a correlation. This is the book.
Yes, absolutely. This is kind of the book that we're usually referring to. And I mean, I know this book really sparked a lot of interest for a lot of people. When we say a flap happens in a certain area, what we mean is there's a lot of sightings of either UFOs or Bigfoot or whatever in a relatively short span of time. I don't think people often realize how often I drop books. This is why we edit.
No, I think you should keep all that in there. I think that's cool. You can't write things like that.
It shows people how real we actually are.
How the sausage is made.
Anyway, what I was saying was, I don't think people realize when we say how like there was like this flap in the early 70s in the Chestnut Ridge area, we're talking, this is a almost 400-page book that basically looks at 72 to 74. And some of the pages have 2 or 3 sightings on them. Like you can literally see these things happening day by day as things apparently move across the Latrobe area. It's really fascinating. But anyway, there's a few stories in this book that get particularly a lot of attention by Stan Gordon, the author. And one of them has to do with this incident that happened specifically on October 25th, 1973, just outside of Uniontown, Pennsylvania. It always caught my attention because it really has everything. And the reason I thought about this recently was because of, on the last episode, we talked about Chris's Highlander story, where as far as a ghost interaction, it basically had everything you would want.
I would also add really quickly that this is the same area too. When Chris was talking about, you know, he's talking about Latrobe, Ligonier, Greensburg, same exact areas in which this, like Brendan states, that this book is really focused on.
Yes, and that's kind of what got me thinking about it. So I wanted to cover this case just in a brief way, just to kind of bring up some of the elements of it and tie it to some of the other things we've been talking about. One of my other favorite authors, well, 2 of my favorite authors, Tim Renner and Joshua Cutchin, in their book Where the Footprints End, which is also one of my sources here, in the intro, they discuss this case. And the first time I read that, I was super excited because I didn't realize kind of anyone else was hit that hard by that case as far as how interesting and how just kind of fantastical it was. Now, granted, the look at it that Tim Renner and Joshua Cutchin take is a little more contemporary, obviously, and it's kind of placed in context where Stan Gordon's recount of it is very much a objective, here's what happened at the time. It's very much more journalistic rather than contemplative. But so without further ado, what I'd like to do is just start with the words of the primary witness. Now, I'm going to apologize for something ahead of time. The gentleman who is the primary witness here, his name is, I'm not going to use his last name, but his first name is George. That's his actual first name. In the Silent Invasion book, Stan almost always uses pseudonyms. So in my head, for all these years, I have thought of this guy's name as Steve, not George, because that's the name that Stan used for him. So I'm going to try and say George as often as possible, but if I say Steve, I'm talking about the same person, and I am sorry. It's just old habit. So what I'm going to do now is read to you the account of what happened initially, because once Stan's team get involved, there's some other stuff that happens. But right off the bat, this is George's account when he was interviewed about this incident. And I'm going to read it as he wrote it. So there's some grammar in here and some word usage that I would not use. So that's where that's coming from, just as a heads up. We was in a pickup truck. We was coming out to my father's farm. We turned off a main road up a dirt lane to go to his farm. As we were going up the lane, I looked to the left and I seen this big orange ball in the sky. And it wasn't no more than maybe 100 feet off the ground. We was astonished and stopped and then drove up on the house. So we all looked off the porch and we watched. It was just coming down slow. It was making like some kind of humming noise then. My mother and them was there and they was a little bit scared. So I says, well, I'll go look and see what I can see from down there. So I went down, pulled up in their driveway, and I'm looking up on the hill. All I could see was a glow, reflection off the ground. I'm going to have to go back to my house, I said, and then I'll go out in the field and check. So they had twin boys. Their names was Rick and Nick. They was about 10 to 12 years old, in that range. They say, can we go up with you to the rise? Yeah, get in. So they got up in the back of the pickup truck. We went to my dad's house and we parked the truck at the house. Got out of the truck. You could hear this like alarm whir. It was a real loud whirring noise, like a turbine running or something. And we were standing there listening, and I hear like this distant crying, like a baby crying or a kid yelling, whatever. And it scared me. So my dad had a couple tracers there for his 30-06 rifle and some bullets. Don't ask me why. I put the tracers in and I carried the bullets with me up there. These two twins were standing there with me, and one twin said, here comes something along the fence. Mustn't have maybe been 100 feet to my right on the hillside, and I'm looking and I can see the movement of this thing from the glow of this ball. So when it got within maybe 50 or 60 feet, maybe 70 feet away from us, I looked at it and there was this object walking. It was real tall and it seemed like it was walking real slow, but taking long strides. I mean, there was movement, slow in the body. And I'm watching it, and here it is following the fence line. And every time it would get to another fence post, it would make this noise. And then I seen why it was making this noise. For this thing behind it, another one, to come right up behind it. As soon as the second one would get up to it, it would proceed to another fence post. And this thing, when you got directly diagonally from us, this one little twin, he started screaming. I think it was Ricky. He started running. He run back down to the house. Nikki grabbed my leg and said, shoot it, shoot it. So I shot a tracer over its head, and the tracer flared. And I seen these things. It was tall. The fence posts that was there were railroad ties. They towered over top of these things. The front of one towered over 2 feet, and the second one must have maybe been a foot shorter. I shot a tracer over there, and it just looked at them. And the front one looked at me, and I could see the glow of their eyes. So I shot the second tracer, same thing. And I mean, when I shot the second tracer, the first one reached its hand back, and to my mind, it would have been the length of this table. And it touched the other one, and the light went out. The light just completely went out. I was standing there, and I could see both their eyes looking at me, just like cat eyes. And this little kid screamed, so I put a regular bullet in, and there was still a glow out there from the ground. Like the ground was glowing. The glow was along the fence line, but the big ball went out, and I shot the first one. And I remember seeing a piece of that wood just splinter, just come off the side of it. I put in the other two bullets that I had underneath in the chamber. That made 3. I shot again, and twice I hit it, right in it, because it sounded like I was shooting into a lake or something, just like water popping. They turned around and they followed that fence. They didn't go towards the light. They followed that fence back. They started moving, and we ran. We both ran. So that is George's account when talking to one of the doctors after the fact.
Could you explain what a tracer is?
Yeah, so a tracer round, that's a good point, Nick. What a tracer round is I believe it's a phosphorus that burns like white red hot that is fired from a regular bullet casing. I'm not sure what they're used for outside of like military usage. I'm not sure why normal folks would have tracers, but you do hear about it, and you can go to, a ammunition store and buy them. But they're bright. They're very, very bright. It's not like a flare gun. But I believe it's probably the same chemical compound where it's that real bright white red. So if you were firing tracing rounds, it was not like it would hang in the air very long, but it would light up the whole area. So as far as what happened from there, that's this gentleman George's account. And I wanted to read it like that because I thought just hearing it in his own words tells the initial story very well. So from there, they go back to, I guess, his parents' house. Whenever you read the story, especially from Stan Gordon's account, you get the impression that a lot of folks in the immediate area outside here in Uniontown are, at least of this guy's neck of the woods, are related. Like the father doesn't live far from him, and then there's the grandmother who lives over the hill. They're all very close, and it's all family, it seems like. So he goes back to the family's house, and then they call the state police. The state police come out, they start investigating, and Stan Gordon had such a reputation with the police all over this area that they kind of knew anytime they had anything weird per se, Stan would legitimately get a phone call because they knew that he was the expert in this stuff. And again, especially at this time, this stuff is happening daily. Stan gets a call at 10:30 from a Fayette County state trooper. And Stan tells the state trooper that he's already had multiple reports throughout the evening. I think 15 separate reports of this large red sphere being seen in the area, and dogs acting strangely, which is another kind of like trope almost. So Stan kind of already knew something was going on, but was not aware of this gentleman's interaction, obviously. So Stan got his team together, and they ended up meeting up with not the state trooper, but with George and his father, because George, this guy's only 22 at this time. He's not he's a relatively young guy. They meet actually at I believe the mall right there, head out to the farm and everything, where they meet back up with the state trooper. When they get there, the glow from where this craft was apparently is still visible on the ground. Stan and his team said that the glow extended 150 feet in diameter in this field and was between 12 and 24 inches tall at any time. Like it physically sat like on the ground. They used radiation like Geiger counters and found that there was no unusual radiation levels. While they were doing this, George and I guess his father noticed a bright light down by the barn. On a few occasions, they went to investigate, but didn't really find anything. But again, the state trooper famously said that this glow was so bright that you could read a newspaper if you wanted to, which sounds significant. Stan also mentions at this time that this gentleman George and the father as well seem very shaken. They seem to really not be sure kind of what they have seen. But again, Stan's trying to approach this from a objective standpoint. So they're over near the fence line whenever Stan says they're trying to look for hair samples, because they said these two beings were on the fence. They were looking for hair samples around the fence, and this gentleman George started to have some kind of an issue where he started breathing real heavy. He ended up growling like a dog, just like started like wailing and like throwing his arms around, kind of running in a circle, like just really really kind of losing his grip. The family dog that was his dog, I guess, like was freaked out by it, ran away. And while this is happening, while Steve's father is trying to, Steve told you I'd say it, while George's father is trying to get George under control, one of Stan's team members, Dennis Smeltzer, and another gentleman named Fred Pitt, both mentioned that they were feeling dizzy and they were having trouble breathing. At this point, Stan noticed a sickening smell of sulfur in the area as well. So they all kind of decided it was time to like kind of get out of there, and they were able to calm George down. And after they got him calmed down, one of the gentlemen from Steve's team handed George his glasses because he needed glasses, and they had come off while he was having this kind of fit. George said he could see just fine. Suddenly he doesn't need glasses anymore. And George is talking to them, saying like, because he's not sure what happened. He doesn't remember just freaking out, a few moments ago. But he says that he had a vision during this time of a man in a black cloak with a black hat carrying a sickle that told him that if man did not change their ways, that the world was doomed, basically. This is also strange because George was not known to be a particularly religious person or anything who would, be quoting Revelations, randomly or anything like that. But so they get George back to the house, and within the next few days, Stan is able to get a Dr. Schwartz, who was a well-respected psychiatrist, I guess, from New Jersey, come out with the state trooper and investigate, basically talk to the trooper and talk to George and the rest of the team and kind of figure out, like, from a psychological standpoint, like, what, like, if anything happened, why did all this stuff kind of happen at once? What's going on here? Just kind of get his opinion. His diagnosis was this George character, who, again, no previous history of mental illness or anything like that, randomly went into what was called a fugue state, which is a state it's like a disturbed state of consciousness where you kind of leave, you go somewhere else, and you don't recall it afterwards. You have amnesia for that period of time. George was not into paranormal stuff, religious stuff before this, and then 2 weeks after this all happened, two men in blue Air Force uniforms showed up to re-interview George, and they told him that that they were friends with the police and also friends with Stan Gordon. They interviewed him. They convinced him to let them hypnotize him. They showed him a series of photographs, apparently of UFOs and Bigfoot, that George said they were convincing looking photos, though they didn't look particularly like the things that he had seen. Then they said they'd be in contact. They left. And, big surprise there, they actually were not connected with Stan Gordon or this state trooper at all. The state trooper was also interviewed on multiple occasions. I don't think they ever mentioned his name, but he was interviewed on multiple occasions, both by the state police, but also by Stan as well, because he was there for this whole thing as well. So you have kind of like three parties involved the whole time, where you have George and his either two nephews or his father. You have Stan and his team. Then you have this state trooper who was there from Fayette County. So you kind of have three individual parties all experiencing the two sides of basically what happened with this event. So that's kind of long and short of what happened outside of Uniontown, Pennsylvania, October 5th, should be 25th, 1973. That's a story that has stuck with me for a long time, and I was so glad to see that Tim Renner and Josh Cutchin talked about it, because what they use that for, like I said, is in the intro of their book, Where the Footprints End, and the subtitle of that book is High Strangeness and the Bigfoot Phenomenon. Kind of, it's where all of these things kind of meet. It's almost like a look into how these things may or may not be related. So Nick, I know you weren't terribly familiar with this story ahead of time, especially some of the details at least. What are some of your initial thoughts about this whole thing?
Well, I have a few thoughts that I wrote down. One, this reminds me a lot of years ago. Some of you who listen to this may be familiar with Coast to Coast AM. It was a favorite radio show of mine. I haven't been able to tune into it for a long time because there's stations around me pick it up, but I will never forget the first time I heard it, because I was driving in the middle of West Virginia in the very wee hours of the morning. I wasn't sleeping very much. I had eaten half a loaf of potato bread. Don't ask me why any of these things are relevant. But I'm listening to the story of a security guard who talks about a light that comes down and there's another light behind it. A very similar story. I believe this fellow was in the Carolinas, and he is an armed security guard. So at one point he opens fire at these lights. And now I'm interested in this, but the thing that really fascinated me and made me a dedicated listener until our media area dropped Coast to Coast AM was that the host took it all in super credulously and basically gave a little lecture about how these things they've come so far. I think the worst thing you can do is express open hostility. Well, open hostility seemed to work in this story, but there's a few other things I want to mention that are kind of just soft comments. The other being, what is with the newspaper standard? Since when did a standard unit of light measurement become one's ability to read a newspaper by it? Because I remember, too, as a child watching In Search of with Leonard Nimoy, and they were recounting UFOs in a particular episode, and the light one emitted in the stentorian voice of Leonard Nimoy was enough to read a newspaper by. Of course, if you look into the Carrington event, which is something I'm fascinated by, it was stated that Aurora Borealis was seen in the southern hemisphere, I believe, or at least the southern United States, bright enough that you could read a newspaper by. I don't think that many people are reading newspapers these days. I just feel like, when did that become the standard unit of lux? But the things that interest me, I do wonder. The light is interesting. The light being shot at and dispersing, it does make me wonder about different fungal things. The sulfur smell, I don't find like super interesting, only because we know there's a lot of mining in our area, and there are a lot of mineral springs. But of course, if these are the people that are intimately familiar with the land there, that would mean something different to me. It wasn't made quite clear to me if that sulfur smell could be explained away by the environment itself, because I mean, there are old resorts that are built around these springs, and yeah, they smell distinctly of sulfur, and it's not pleasant. I don't think that's as novel a thing, really. The other thing I do want to bring up, it deals with the Air Force people. One, why are they wearing dress uniforms? Like, how are they so easily identified as Air Force? But this gets me on to Stan Gordon too, with relation to the Kecksburg incident, because I'm not saying that Stan Gordon is making a thing up, but I do have sometimes a feeling like I need to take this with a grain of salt, because I believe it is from Stan that we hear the Kecksburg thing, that people from NASA were there. Well, how do you verify that? It's not like people in NASA are wearing NASA uniforms, like they're coming out, like they're stepping off the Apollo 10 mission or something. I don't know. So when I hear about the Air Force coming in and asking questions, I'm confused by that. One, how do you know there were Air Force people? Is this just how the story has kind of evolved over time? And we know that it is a fact that the US government was involved in learning and trying to figure out these identified object phenomenon. In fact, even earlier this week or last week, I believe, there was a new 8-page report that was released, declassified by the United States government. Was that the Air Force that was responsible for that, Brendan, or was that another body? I believe it was a Blue Book is the one that everybody cites.
Yes. Yeah. Project Blue Book. I believe it was an oversight committee, but it could be just Air Force.
I'm going to look that up right now.
But to answer your question about how, real quick, about how George knew, they apparently were dressed in the blue Air Force, like the formal uniforms.
Okay. Well,
that's what he says.
Confirmed.
Yeah.
That's okay. I have confirmed that it was Project Blue Book was the code name of the United States Air Force from March 1952 until December 1969.
Yeah. So it was
headquartered at Wright-Patterson in Ohio.
Yeah, which that could be its own episode for sure right there. Because I mean, that's also where you get a lot of the spookiness around Wright-Patterson, is because of Project Blue Book, because, you know, that's apparently where the Kecksburg crash was taken. That's where Roswell was taken. You know, people in the area, you know, always say that there's crazy lights out there. Yeah, and I want to just real quick to your, I think you made a good point there about the sulfur. What's compelling about this case, with a lot of the little things, is we all know correlation does not equal causation. We all know that. but you have enough correlation and it starts to kind of, get a little bit harder to prove that there isn't that causation. So it's like when you have a guy going into a fugue state who has obviously gone through something stressful but never had any mental health issues before, that's weird. You have two other people from a different party having the same medical issues at the same time, and then you have a third member smelling a sulfur smell. I don't think that you can say that the sulfur caused all three. The sulfur smell, regardless of whether it is paranormal or not, caused all three of those things. Is this sulfur smell where does it come from? If it does, even if it is natural, why is it affecting these people randomly, or is it just happenstance? Is it all
right?
Is
it the change of the wind? Is it just something that you became more aware of because your senses are heightened? I did think it was funny that this presence made dogs act strangely and people act like dogs. That was another interesting thing. But some of the things that you talk about a lot, the baby sounds, the mimicry, and these smells, these are all things that you have talked about quite a bit in previous conversations that we've had. And I'm curious, as far as the literature goes, how far back these associations are, or if these are brought by Stan himself.
Well, I believe that there is baby mimicry in Fey lore. I'd have to look,
but with the association with cryptid phenomenon,
that's
with ghosts, we've always
that's a good question. I honestly don't know the answer off the top of my head for that. Because again, I know in some of Stan's stuff it is mentioned a lot, usually adjacent to Bigfoot phenomena. I don't know if he ever directly draws that correlation, or if that was something that he picked up from other folks. I don't know if other contemporaries. That's one of the problems is you look at this stuff and this, like, I haven't read anything else from the 70s necessarily outside of Stan Gordon. So I don't know what other paranormal investigators across the country or world were saying at the same time. So that's a really good question. I really don't know.
And I'm wondering how many would have been, even if there were more, would have been around this neck of the woods at this time, because when we think about this period in time, I mean, I think this is when this topic is starting to get kind of legs again. We know in the 50s, late 50s, the UFO thing, through the sci-fi, through some incidents that, I think we now view as bigger things. Like we've talked about this in the past. Like we take for granted different things like Roswell and the Battle of Los Angeles being more widely known events, but how widely known were they in their time versus just a general idea of flying saucers? One of the things I want to do is I want to go back and look through contemporary things to see if I can find anything. So send me that date when you're able, because I'd be curious as to the local reporting, which we've looked at before, specifically with regard to Kecksburg, which again is in this general area. We're talking Westmoreland and Fayette County and this little pocket of western Pennsylvania.
No, that's a really good point.
Somerset County too, because that's I believe Kecksburg is in Somerset County.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really good point to bring up. I honestly don't know what the correlation is, and I think it'd be interesting to see if there are any contemporary sources that say, similar things. Man, that would be I'm sure there's some folks in the paranormal community that have stuff that goes back that far that I'm sure have looked into that previously. I'm going to do some research on that on my end too. That's a really interesting question. What did you think about the glow that they talked about after the UFO had changed and then left or disappeared? This glow that stayed around that was visible.
Yeah, maybe think of fungal things. There are certain types of fungus that can be found in nature that actually do emit a phosphorescent glow. So I'd be curious if there's any correlation with that. I'm just trying to think of something natural. One of the things that interests me is the relative small size and the following nature of it, and why are they hopping from one fence post to the next? Like, what is so interesting about that to them?
I thought that was interesting because again, in Stan's version, that goes through it whenever he's talking about it. It makes it sound like the two creatures, one would go to one fence post, then the other would come up. Like they would always stay like one fence post apart from each other, and would not be moving at the same time until they eventually get shot at. Then they move away at a quicker pace.
Well, and that's another thing. I get confused as to where the ship is and where the flying object is, or versus where this cryptid thing is in the story itself.
You're right, because it's a little hard to keep track of. That's why Stan actually does have, I know folks at home can't see this, but he does have a diagram with the footage and everything of where everything was in relation. I'm going to try and explain what it looks like. So imagine you have the house, 45-degree angle from the house, 750 feet. You have the UFO. Then at a probably 40-degree angle from that, going back to the right, you have the guy standing there who got out of the car, George and his two nephews. And then the wood line is to the left of them towards the UFO, but like behind the UFO. And then the fence line is to their right. So these two things come up from the direction of the UFO in the woods up along the fence line to their right. So the house is to like their back. These things are on the right, UFOs on the left. That's the best way.
I think people should just go out and buy the book for the illustration.
You should just go by the book. Yeah, I'm not doing it a ton of justice. I apologize.
Yeah, and you started this off by saying that this is one of those stories that has just so much going on. You compared it to our friend Chris's from a couple episodes back, specifically where the Scottish Highlanders come down. They push supposedly people who've been dead for a couple hundred years, pushing living people, reenactors down to the ground, praying with them. It's just so over the top. And this is kind of like that for me here too. It's just, one, we love Stan Gordon. I love Stan Gordon, but like sometimes I wonder like how things have grown, because he is seen as an authoritative voice in these stories, and he has legitimately been collecting these things since he was a teenager, and he has a reputation and people do go to him. But I also have read between the lines sometimes, and I wonder about some of the things he's written is what I'll leave it at. And I know we've talked about this a lot with regard, again, to the Kecksburg incident, which, of course, I believe is one of those UFO incidents which is not just very big and widely known here in Western Pennsylvania, but across of UFO lore and the people that follow that closely. I think that is one of top 5 incidents, but maybe I'm just being proud of the region with that. I know with a lot of the things that have been declassified, and we've had that conversation in our Kecksburg episode, I feel like Stan has been very protective of the mystery remaining a mystery. And so I try to read a lot of his stuff through that lens. I hope that's making sense.
Oh yeah, no, I get what you're saying. And I think that's also like if you apply that lens to all of his work, I believe that does put other ones in different context. I think this one is one of those stories though that has so much going on with it, and because you do have the multiple parties of like this guy who's like a known guy in the community, a state trooper, who is, has his own professional life and personal life that was affected by this, and then Stan and multiple members of his team. I think that you have so many different things happening though, that a lot of like the normal, more everyday explanations that we would have for these things, because even like you said with the glow that was left over, it not being radioactive, I think absolutely leads to a biological explanation, which we do have bioluminescent fungi in the area. There are phenomena like foxfire that can glow and everything, but some of those things are so rare on their own, it would be just as fantastical to see that on its own. And then you put that adjacent to seeing a UFO, which could have been mistaken for something. But what are the odds you have that mistake being mistaken for that? You have this glow being mistaken for foxfire. You have these two creatures that are actually been mistaken for bears. You have then this guy suddenly is spouting stuff off about the end of the world, and you have other dudes getting sick. Like there's just so many things happen back to back in one night, really in like a matter of like 4 or 5 hours.
And in a very small region,
yeah, like this is like this dude's front yard. Like
right.
they're not going far. I think this is one of those cases, and I think that's why he gives the case so much page space.
Well, sure. If I witnessed all of this, or I had come by in the immediate aftermath of a bunch of this, it would definitely hit me way different.
Yeah.
I'm kind of looking at it and I'm wondering, how has this all evolved? I don't know. And that's why, again, when we get together next time, I'm going to have done some research on this date and see if there isn't anything kind of in the local media about this, because again, I don't know. I'm thinking if police are being called in, there should be something documented in some way, even if it's just in the police reports, a small notice. I just want to have something more.
Yeah, no, I get that. And I think that's also maybe one of the fundamental differences in how me and you both react to cases like this. And I think it's, again, I'm saying this in a good way. Like I hear this story, like you hear this story and your natural inclination is to be like, okay, I want some more verification, kind of thing, which is, again, completely reasonable. And I'm not knocking that at all. And for me, I hear this case and I get kind of caught up in how fantastic it is.
Right.
And think about just like, okay, yeah, like maybe you have UFO phenomena, you have Bigfoot phenomena, you have Men in Black phenomena, you have abductee phenomena, all happening in like a short period of time. You have three kind of separate parties involved. Let's say half of this is wrong. Yeah, it's like because the thing that I remember someone saying a long time ago. I don't remember who it was. And it's really poor logic. Like, as someone who's a studied philosopher, it's really poor logic, but I love the sentiment of it. Is only one ghost needs to be real for ghosts to exist. Only one UFO and only one Bigfoot.
It's kind of like it's kind of putting a plus on the Socratic method, isn't it?
Exactly. But
it's the other thing I'll say real quick is that this story hits a lot of the things that you always say, like those are the things that really set you off.
They really
baby sounds, which is representative of mimicry in a way. You've always cited that as being, of these paranormal stories, one of the things that you find really unsettling, even in a casual story.
Yeah. And the fact that this guy is just like walking around looking at a UFO and hears a baby crying before seeing these two, like Bigfoot and everything, or whatever they were. And, the eye shine and everything. And like, again,
one of the things that doesn't sit with me very well, though, is like, if you heard a baby crying, even if there's not supposed to be one, and we've talked about this, your instinct is kind of a protective one, or you're at least alerted. The fact that they don't know what's going on, but the kids are now scared, so they're shooting at it. Even with tracers or not, and you think that there may be a baby in the area, I don't think it reflects very well of the state of mind, or at least the decision making.
That is an excellent point. Also, I mean, there also could be some cultural differences. I mean, this was obviously a very rural area at the time. Maybe shooting at stuff was a lot more common than we think. I think that's a good point. Like, okay, well, if you were concerned about it, but maybe they weren't. Maybe they heard that sound and immediately knew, okay, that's not something natural, or that's not a baby, or whatever kind of thing. So
one of my favorite, just because you bring it up, shooting at stuff being much more common. There is a county around us. I'm not going to say which one right off the gate because I want to verify this. This is the county I'm thinking. No, you know what? No, I'm going to say it. Clarion County, just a little outside. They have a courthouse. There's a little statue on top. Some years back, they took the statue down, or they were doing something to the courthouse building, and there were something like 20 bullet holes in the statue because people would go, this is Main Street, and they would just go and fire upon it. So yeah, maybe so.
Sounds about right.
You might have something to say there. That doesn't make me think any better about the decision making. Hey, there may be a baby present.
You're right. That's a good point. That's a good point. I can't argue with that. I just think I think it's a fun story. I think it hits a lot of bases, and I was reminded of it after Chris's Highlander story, because it's just like, man, what a wild tale.
Well, I can definitely see the correlation between the two. It doesn't seem like there's a correlation at first, but again, it's regional. It's just one thing on top of another thing on top of another thing. It's almost unending how much is going on. I can definitely see the correlation there.
So that's all we have for tonight for everyone. I want to thank everyone for listening. We've been getting a little more feedback from folks. So if you guys out there have anything you either want to talk to us about, if you have a story you'd like to share, or if you just like to correct us on something, you can get a hold of us either on Facebook or Instagram, or you can send us an email at theghostfurnacepodcast@gmail.com.